I'm delighted to be joined by elected officials from states around the country, including Governor Lamont, to talk about your leadership on eliminating junk fees and lowering costs for Americans, as well as partners across the federal government who are taking important actions. President Biden believes that prices are just too high on so many things, and he's fighting to lower costs for American families. One of the major drivers of high prices are junk fees, those hidden fees that companies sneak onto your bills at the last minute. Those costs, $10 here, $50 there, may not mean much to wealthy people, but to a working family at the kitchen table trying to make ends meet, these junk fees add up fast. Analysis from the White House Council of Economic Advisors shows junk fees cost Americans $90 billion every year. That means $650 per household on average. Since the first White House convening of states to combat junk fees last March, we've taken several landmark actions that are bringing down costs. Once finalized, these actions are bringing down overdraft fees from $35 to as low as $3, saving a typical family that pays overdraft fees $150 a year, bringing down credit card late fees, sometimes from $32 to $8, saving the typical family that pays these fees $220 a year, securing commitments from 4 major airlines to eliminate family seating fees, saving families $50 per child per flight. Just today, requiring airlines to give automatic cash refunds when flights are significantly delayed or canceled, and banning hidden and surprise fee from airlines for checked bags or seat selection. Banning hidden and surprise fees from ticket sellers, requiring cable and satellite TV providers to show consumers the all-in price for video programs, eliminating early termination fees from cable and satellite TV providers that can be as much as $200, reducing mortgage interest premiums for FHA borrowers, saving over 600,000 American households an average of $800 per year, cracking down on junk patent regulatory filings, which has led several big companies to bring down the cost of asthma inhalers from hundreds of dollars to $35 per month. And just yesterday, cracking down on retirement junk advice so that savers receive advice in their best interest, leading up to as much as 20% more in retirement savings. On so many of these junk fee actions, we're taking inspiration from action that state officials have pioneered. In March, the American Economic Liberties Project released data showing that over 3/4 of Americans support state legislation to ban businesses from charging junk fees. And in just the last year, 12 states have introduced or passed junk fee legislation. We'll be hearing more about that on this call. State legislatures can implement policies where the federal government may not have the same authorities, and state attorneys generals have an important enforcement role to play. And critically, state officials are on the ground hearing from Americans every day about why it's important to go after junk fees and what junk fees are the most problematic. So in the next hour, we're going to hear from elected officials from Connecticut, New York, Minnesota, Illinois, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, all of whom have been leading the charge on junk fees. These actions, together with the actions that you'll hear about from my partners at the federal level, are key building blocks for a fair, middle-out, bottom-up economy. So thanks to all of you for the great work that you're doing. We're excited to work with you on continuing to bring down costs for Americans. And I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Domestic Policy Advisor Neera Tanden.
Thanks so much, Lael. As Lael said, I'm the chair of the Domestic Policy Council. I'm the Domestic Policy Advisor to the President, and I'm really proud to lead a broad portfolio that covers everything from healthcare to housing to education. And as Lael said, the Biden-Harris administration is taking action to crack down on junk fees across the economy, using every tool we have to fight for the American people and make progress. Today, I'll just highlight 3 examples of our work in specific sectors and really just have a very robust collaboration with the NEC on these issues. First, this administration is cracking down on junk health insurance. Earlier this year, we released a final rule that cracks down on low-quality health coverage, protecting millions of consumers from getting ripped off by junk insurance. These junk insurance plans mislead customers into thinking, and consumers into thinking they are buying real health insurance. Then, just when they need medical care, they find out their plans cap their benefits, that they are still subject to pre-existing condition requirements, that their care isn't covered at all. So right when you need your health insurance, it isn't there. And that's what we mean by junk insurance, because really when you need insurance most, you shouldn't be footing a gigantic bill. Our new rule closes the loopholes the previous administration exploited and restores the type of coverage to what it was intended to be: temporary, no more than 4 months, and be used just for people who are in transition and moving from one job to another. And insurance companies will now have to provide clear disclaimers that explains to people exactly what is not covered and tells them how to find comprehensive coverage instead. Our new rule is really there to give people the peace of mind that their insurance will be there when they need it. This rule will make these plans fairer and help ensure customers and consumers know that they're getting what they sign up for. Second, we are taking action to root out junk fees for students and families paying for college. When families pay for college, there are hidden and surprise fees that increase college costs. And so earlier this year, we announced a host of changes to save students and student loan borrowers billions in unnecessary fees. For the first time ever, President Biden has proposed to eliminate student loan origination fees. This will save roughly 7 million students, borrowers, more than $1 billion annually. Our administration is also doing rulemaking on a number of consumer and student-friendly policies to lower college costs. Everything from returning unused meal plan dollars to students to getting rid of unusual fees for college banking accounts. We've also established final rules to prohibit colleges from withholding transcripts from students, or in just a really common sense protection. This whole work builds on the president's agenda to lower costs, eliminate junk fees, and make higher education a ticket to the middle class, not a barrier to opportunity. And finally, we're taking on junk fees in rental housing. Rental housing fees can be a serious burden to renters. Rental application fees can be up to $100 or more per application. And importantly, they often exceed the actual cost of conducting the background and credit checks. Even after renters secure their housing, they are often surprised to be charged mandatory fees on top of their rent, including convenience fees to pay rent online and fees for things like mail sorting and trash collection. There have been reports on January fees charged for no clear reason at the beginning of a new calendar year. That's why last year, President Biden secured commitments from major rental housing platforms to provide greater transparency in the rental search process. Zillow, Apartments.com, and AffordableHousing.com changed their websites to provide consumers with total upfront cost information on all rental properties. So consumers really know what they're getting and what their money is going towards. Transparency can be a critical first step and help consumers comparison shop with full information. By showing the total upfront cost, a prospective renter can avoid getting tricked into choosing an apartment thinking it is less expensive, only to learn that after fees and other add-ons, the actual cost for their chosen apartment is much higher than they expected or can afford. Really, in all of these ways, we are trying to ensure that companies are being as honest and upfront with customers as possible. As the president likes to say, nobody really wants to ever be taken for a sucker, and the government is on the side of the consumer and the customer to ensure that they're not taken advantage of in the process and charged what they really shouldn't be. So we're going to keep fighting junk fees wherever they appear, and we're eager to partner with state legislators and others leaders who are delivering wins for the American people. And now it's my honor to turn it over to Chair Lina.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to the president's clear-eyed leadership, the steadfast commitment from Director Brainard and Director Tanden, and the critical work of colleagues like Director Chopra, this administration's fight against junk fees is bringing down costs for American families and protecting honest businesses. It's particularly exciting to be here today alongside policymakers from states across the country who are on the front lines of protecting Americans from corporate abuse and who are fighting back with legislative solutions to root out junk fees. Today, all too often, being a consumer in America increasingly means being saddled with unexpected and unnecessary fees that you can't escape. Whether you're paying a hotel bill, renting an apartment, buying a concert ticket, or ordering dinner online, the price you pay will most likely be higher because of junk fees. As Director Brainard mentioned, junk fees cost Americans over $90 billion a year, money that corporations are extracting from Americans just because they can. These junk fees function as an invisible tax that inflates prices across the economy. And junk fees also punish honest businesses, diverting customers from businesses that don't use junk fees towards those that do. Last year, the FTC finalized a rule that bans junk fees at the auto dealer, making sure that people can buy a car without getting saddled with surprise or worthless fees. We estimate that the rule would save consumers billions of dollars a year and millions of hours that you no longer have to waste. The FTC has also proposed a rule to ban junk fees across the economy. Our proposed rule would prohibit corporations from running up the bills with hidden and bogus fees, spurring firms to instead compete honestly rather than subject consumers to the indignity of paying a convenience fee that is never convenient. The proposal would make sure that corporations cannot lure people in with an artificially low price, but then when it's time to make the purchase, add all sorts of mystery fees that significantly raise the overall cost. Violators would be subject to civil penalties and be required to pay back Americans that they tricked. Since releasing our proposed rule, we've gotten more than 60,000 public comments, mostly from everyday Americans who are sick and tired of paying pointless fees to pad the profits of some of the biggest corporations in America. One Kentucky resident shared that she rented an apartment she thought she could afford based on the advertised price of renting utilities. Only later did she learn that she owed fees, mostly undisclosed in the lease, that added up to nearly 20% of her rent. We've heard similar stories about landlords squeezing renters with obscure charges like move-in and screening fees, package locker fees, trash removal fees, pest control fees, transaction fees, credit reporting fees, and the list goes on. Our team is doing a full review of these 60,000 comments, and we look forward to sharing next steps in the coming months. It's been so energizing to see the groundswell of policy innovation coming from states that are seeking to crack down on junk fees. And the FTC is committed to helping turbocharge this momentum. Our staff have built up extensive expertise through years of enforcement experience, and we stand ready to share that expertise in any way that we can, whether through offering technical assistance, writing letters of support, or providing oral testimony to help advance legislation. As you all continue to spearhead important legislation, we want to make sure that the FTC is not missing opportunities to be force multipliers for this critical work. So please let us know how we can be helpful. Together, our work to root out junk fees not only ensures that Americans can keep more of their paychecks, but it also helps restore a degree of fairness and justice to our markets. Thanks so much again to Director Brainard and Director Tanden for facilitating today's convening, and to Director Chopra for relentlessly holding companies to account if they prey on Americans' pocketbooks. Thanks so much, everybody. And with that, I will pass it over to Director Chopra.
Well, thank you so much, Chair Khan. And really, thanks to all of you in the states who are coming up with new ways for which we can tackle these junk fees even harder. Let me just say that we need an economy that treats people with dignity and respect. And we don't want one where companies are innovating by concocting new ways to harvest junk fees from people and obscure the real price of products and services. So we, along with all agencies across the government, the CFPB is working really hard to eliminate junk fees as part of our work to make sure there's a fair and competitive economy. These back-end fees make it hard for consumers to compare options, it distorts competition, and it really undermines a healthy market. So as we've heard from Director Brainard, Director Tanden, Chair Khan, these fees are showing up in all sorts of crazy ways. And here at the CFPB, we're really looking at financial fees. Families are being charged $30 for paying their credit card one day or even a few hours later, charged big overdraft fees when they're just a tiny bit short to cover their transaction. We see debt collectors charging pay-to-pay fees, or this is the one I love, convenience fees for making payments, just for handing over your money. And it feels like this is not just passing back the cost of a service. It's becoming a profit center, raising prices and gouging people in a way that consumers often can't avoid or didn't know when they signed up in the first place. So the CFPB has finalized a rule to bring down most of these credit card late fees from $32 to $8. We estimate this is going to save American families $10 billion each year. We have been sued over this rule, and we are vigorously defending that. But it's more than credit cards. Today, the CFPB released a detailed analysis, and I urge you to take a look on our website, showing that overdraft and insufficient fund fees for the full year of 2023 is down over $6 billion compared to before the pandemic. And at the same time, quarterly overdraft and NSF fees were pretty flat through 2023, suggesting that most of the year-over-year reduction reflects the impact of changes in policies from 2022. So we've also proposed more protections to rein in excessive overdraft fees at the largest banks, closing a long-standing loophole that exempts these overdraft loans from basic protections under the Truth in Lending Act. And we estimate that will save households on average about $150 each year, totaling really billions of dollars. And today, we also released another report detailing our work to combat junk fees in mortgages. So our CFPB oversight goes on site to these mortgage servicers, and we found all sorts of illegal junk fees, prohibited property inspection fees, deceptive notices to homeowners, violating loan modification rules for struggling borrowers. And we are seeing the results. Just over a part of 2023, we saw $140 million go back to consumers for these unlawful fees and all sorts of products. And since that time, the CFPB's on-site supervision is leading to more than $120 million just in bank account deposits. So we really hope that our reforms in these markets are going to lead to more fair and competitive pricing. I also think it's going to restore a little bit of trust that people really need in the banking system, because they're really tired of all of this fee creep across the economy. They are fed up with paying more for a product than they expected. They're fed up that they can't search and shop and actually see what the true price is until they go 6 screens later, or they go find out months later there's some surprise. And these fees are not, it's not about being an annoyance. It's about, it makes a huge difference for a family's budget. They can't really predict it. It's a shock, and it can send them on a treadmill of debt. So we're really excited for states to play a big role in this. I want to reiterate something Chair Khan said. All of us are looking for ways to help you. We want to weigh in wherever we can. Some of you have asked us who are holding hearings or having legislation or looking to enact new measures. We're really here to work with you, but this is an all hands on deck effort. And I'm just so grateful for everyone across the country who's doing this work.
Thank you so much, Director Chopra, for all of your work on this issue and joining us here today. My name is Lindsay Voles, and I serve as a senior advisor in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs here at the White House. And I have the honor of working with state legislatures across the country on this issue and many more. I am now going to begin the conversation with some of our fantastic state leaders who are on the call with us today. First, turning it over to Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont to talk about his work combating drunk fees. Over to you.
Hey, Lindsay and Neera and Lael and everybody. It's here in Connecticut, we've outlawed junk fees. Let me start by what is a junk fee? There are fees out there. There'll always be fees out there. A junk fee is a hidden, misleading, surprise fee that you don't know about probably till after the transaction is done. And that just hammers a consumer. And what we've done is said, you're going to know the all-in cost of whatever that product may be before you hit that transaction button, before you pay. So there's no surprise, nothing misleading. Oh, look, it's a tricky game out there, and this is good for the consumer, and I'll tell you also why it's good for the business. But let's face it, we have a lot of surprise billing in healthcare right now. I think you heard that from Neera. And we're paying down almost $1 billion of medical debt, stuff you get slammed with because there's some surprise billing. You didn't know you were going to get sick, then you didn't know you're going to have that surprise billing. And we're going to make sure that you know what it costs before you go in to get that treatment that you may need. Or how about that trip to Puerto Rico? It sounded like a pretty good deal, $200 round trip. Then you find out that every bag is another $200, and there's a service fee and a handling fee. And pretty soon you land and you've got insufficient funds in your credit card account, and then you have a late payment fee. And this is all the ways that fee upon fee can snowball and really put the consumer at an incredible disadvantage. And that's what we're getting rid of. That's why I'm so thankful that the Biden administration is taking the lead on this. And one other thing I just like to say as a guy to come out of the business world before I'm doing this current gig is I don't want to compete against folks that have cheap, sleazy teaser rates and back end fees that the consumer is not informed about what they're getting into. I like an informed consumer. I want them to know where they get the best value. That's how the market works really well. You can shop for value. You know it's going to cost. You know if it's going to meet your needs. And I think this is the right thing to do in terms of getting a market that works for everybody and making sure the consumer gets a fair shake. Thanks for what you're all doing.
Thank you so much, Governor, for joining us today and all of your work on this issue. I will now be turning it over to New York Deputy Senate Leader Michael Gianaris, who his staffer just emailed me that it is his birthday and he is joining us here today. So appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Lindsay. Technically, it was yesterday, but I appreciate the good wishes regardless. My name is Michael Gianaris. I serve as the Deputy Majority Leader of the New York State Senate, where I represent Western Queens. And the reality is what we're talking about today is really a simple issue because there is no good argument why fees should be hidden from consumers. Companies can try and rationalize the usefulness or the purpose of these fees, but at the end of the day, all they do is hurt consumers and undermine real competition. They prevent us from having an equitable economy and are overwhelmingly used to harm the most vulnerable populations. We all know too many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and predatory junk fees are exacerbating the cost of living crisis that all these Americans are experiencing. Federal Trade Commission deserves credit for making significant progress combating these fees, and it is critically important that our individual states also do our part to protect consumers. I have legislation that has passed the state Senate called the New York Junk Fee Prevention Act. It would make New York among the leaders in the country protecting people from these deceptive practices by requiring anyone doing business in New York to clearly and conspicuously disclose the total price of a good or a service, inclusive of all mandatory fees, from the outset, not just at the end of the payment process, as you heard earlier speakers indicate, not 6 screens into a transaction, but at the beginning. Most people recognize that junk fees are a problem, which is why I'm excited to be with so many policymakers from all over the country who are taking these real steps to address this problem. We have all seen how service fees, fulfillment fees, convenience fees, and other vaguely worded fees have raised the price of everything from concert tickets and hotel bookings to car rentals and internet services. We have seen how by obscuring these charges until they suddenly pop up at checkout, companies have made it more difficult, if not impossible, for consumers to compare prices and search for the best deals, leading many to surrender to artificially inflated prices. The competition that is undermined from this process is obvious, but companies are incentivized, even the ones who want to operate more scrupulously, they're incentivized to engage in deceptive pricing rather than improve their products or lower their prices, forcing many honest businesses to either lose market share or go down the rabbit hole and impose junk fees themselves. This dynamic has created a dangerous race to the bottom in which junk fees have become the norm in the American economy. As public servants, we can no longer allow junk fees to nickel and dime the public. That's why I wholeheartedly applaud the Federal Trade Commission and the Biden administration for advancing these proposed regulations and taking such an important leadership role. And I'm so excited to be joined by the elected officials representing a diverse group of states that are on this call today to crack down on junk fees and require more transparent pricing. My hope is that through our collective efforts, we will promote fair market competition and provide much needed relief to consumers. As President Biden said at his State of the Union address, the administration's actions would put approximately $20 billion back into the pockets of working class families, and that is help that is sorely needed at this moment in history. So thank you all again for being part of this effort. I look forward to great success.
Thank you so much, Senator, for all of your work. I'm now going to turn it over to Arizona State Representative Ortiz, who's had a busy day in the legislatures, but's making time for us. So.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody, for having me. I'm Arizona State Representative Annalise Ortiz. I have the honor of serving the people of West Phoenix and South Glendale in Arizona's 24th Legislative District. This year, I sponsored HB 2122. This bill will require businesses to be transparent about all mandatory fees or charges listed in the advertised price for their goods or services. Otherwise, they could face monetary penalties. HB 2122 would mark a new era of transparency and fairness in consumer interactions. It seeks to address a pervasive issue that has plagued consumers for far too long: the imposition of junk fees, those hidden charges that sneakily find their way onto our bills without us even realizing it. We all know what it's like to receive your monthly bill, be it for internet, phone services, or your rent, only to find that the amount you owe is significantly higher than what you were initially quoted. Research has shown that junk fees can add as much as 20% of the total cost of a product. At a time when Arizonans and people across the country are struggling to get by, every dollar counts. These junk fees are often buried in the fine print or presented in confusing language. It erodes trust between companies and consumers, and it creates an atmosphere of uncertainty and frustration. Consumers should not have to feel helpless and taken advantage of when they're in the checkout line. Now, unfortunately, my bill, HB 2122, was assigned to an unrelated committee, a tactic often used by Arizona's GOP majority to kill bills they don't like, which was frustrating because I even had a Republican co-sponsor. This is a bipartisan issue. And we know that the vast majority of Arizonans and Americans are with us on this issue. So my fight will not stop, because under my bill, the price you see is the price you pay, period. Businesses should compete on providing the best service at the lowest price, not on coming up with new ways to trick and frustrate consumers with deceptive fees. I'm grateful for the national leadership the Biden administration is demonstrating on this issue. Combating junk fees is about fostering a climate of fairness and accountability in the marketplace, where businesses operate with integrity and consumers are protected from exploitation. It's about building a stronger, more resilient economy where trust is the currency that drives commerce. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Representative. We will now turn it over to Illinois State Representative Bob Morgan.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to join you today to discuss our efforts to ban junk fees here in Illinois. This initiative follows major strides in the past few years to protect consumers and families in our state. Whether it's healthcare or gun violence prevention or predatory and deceptive fees, the government has to step up and step in situations like this. It's also simply the right thing to do. Last week, Illinois took a major step by passing the Junk Fee Ban Act out of the Illinois House with a bipartisan vote. And now it moves over to the state Senate. This legislation, HB 4629, has been a collaborative effort with my friend, State Senator Leader Omar Aquino. It includes support from the Illinois Attorney General and advocacy organizations like Economic Security Project, Citizen Action Illinois, and the AELP to create transparency around pricing to eliminate hidden predatory fees. As has been discussed today, these fees can cost an average family of four over $3,000 per year. That's real money to the average American. Addressing this systemic issue is such an obvious step to protect residents in Illinois that it honestly left me wondering, when did we decide it was okay for businesses to hide fees and deceive us on the pricing of their goods and services? Regardless of when it started, it's going to end now. As this legislation moved through the Illinois House, I was not surprised to see nearly every large corporate interest file in opposition. There is apparently a lot of interest in continuing to charge these lucrative fees, and nearly every industry wanted some kind of protection or carve-out. Despite the onslaught of opposition, we opened up this conversation to every one of those groups in order to hear their concerns. We made reasonable modifications to the legislation to be consistent with existing Illinois and federal law on pricing transparency, but we also held tight to the core mission of the bill, and we did not exempt any particular industry. And due to that, we removed some of the opposition. Thanks to President Biden, the FTC, and other federal agencies, this is now a national conversation. More and more people are becoming hyper aware that an extra dollar here and a dollar there are adding up. Families are suffering real financial consequences, and many small businesses are also suffering as they're trying to compete in an unfair marketplace with deceptively low price tags displayed by competitors who are intentionally concealing the true cost of goods or services. We know that nearly all Illinois residents have fallen victim to these junk fees, but we also know that they disproportionately affect non-English proficient individuals, low-income workers, and people of color. We know that these fees charged at the back end of the purchasing process makes it harder for us to comparison shop for the best deal, and that leads to consumers paying upwards of 20% more for the goods. We are demanding transparency and disclosure of the total price for goods and services in Illinois, and we're going to get that done. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, Representative Morgan. Now over to Minnesota Representative Greenman, who is also having a birthday today.
Must
Happy
be a
birthday.
day. Thank you. And it is wonderful to be here with you. I'm so grateful for the White House for pulling us together to talk about this critical issue, because junk fees are a huge problem. They're impossible to avoid, and they're hurting families, they're hurting responsible businesses, and they're distorting markets. And as you hear around the country, they're distorting markets in all of our communities. In Minnesota, where I represent the 63B, South Minneapolis, in the state legislature, 85% of people report encountering junk fees, and they hate them. Since I've started to work on banning junk fees in Minnesota, I'll say it's probably one of my most popular bills that I've authored. I hear about it all the time because junk fees are an in-your-face example of how concentrated corporate power has tilted our markets, how corporations are using it to power and the power to extract monopoly profits. They're normalizing practices that hurt consumers and hurt our local businesses. The fact is that Minnesotans, like people across the country, are being nickeled and dimed. They're being overcharged and underpaid at the cash register, at online checkout, on their paycheck, and pretty much everywhere else in our economy. The beauty of the bill that we're working on is it just requires all-inclusive pricing. It's a simple rule that everybody understands. The price you see advertised is the price you pay when you buy the good or the service. Last year, my colleagues started working on a ticketing bill, House File 1989, named after a Taylor Swift album and a ticketing fiasco that first got her interested in the issue. But junk fees are everywhere, and they are not just for Taylor Swift concerts anymore. Since I started working on this bill, my legislative colleagues now routinely send me their receipts, their invoices, their menus, their signs from across the state. Convenience fees, wellness fees, resort fees, service, processing, and handling fees. And the one I heard last week that was new, an inflation facility fee, whatever that means. Call them what you want. It's time to get rid of them. We crafted our bill with a lot of conversations and input, a lot of conversations with industry advocates, with state and national leaders, and most importantly, with the Minnesota consumers who will ultimately pay the tab. And while some of my colleagues proposed bills that may limit it to a specific industry or a specific practice, I thought it was really important to have a whole of economy rule since junk fees and junk fee innovation has really taken and become a whole of economy problem. Having one uniform rule is better for consumers, it's better for competition, and it closes loopholes that corporations are really good at exploiting to get around our consumer protection rules. But as you heard from my colleague in Illinois, a single rule is easier said than done. And we have spent hours with our staff going over specific circumstances, particularly regulatory concerns, by dozens of industries and associations. Where it made sense for consumers, we made some accommodations, but we said no a lot, because what's clear is it's time for a change. It's time for the transparency and the consistent rules that people want. Our junk fee bill here in Minnesota comes along with a lot of work that we've been doing to empower workers and families, and is a critical part of our work to strengthen the power of Minnesotans in our democracy and our economy. And I feel so grateful to do this work alongside the amazing work that's happening in the Biden administration, in the FTC, in the CFPB, and with my colleagues around the country, because I think we really are responding to a need and what our constituents are asking us to do. So really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much, Representative, for your time. Last but not least, turning it over to Pennsylvania State Representative Fiscatano.
Thank you, Lindsay. And any elected official will tell you that it's the worst speaking spot is the last spot, because everybody else covers everything before you get a chance to speak. So I'll just echo the comments made by my colleagues from many other states and the federal government on how deceptive these fees are and how harmful they are to consumers and to the economy writ large. I want to talk a little bit about House Bill 636 in Pennsylvania. I serve in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, representing a district outside of Pittsburgh in Western PA. And I introduced this bill to crack down on junk fees, and not in a way that bans them, but in a way that forces them into disclosure. And you know, the idea of junk fees is that they're hidden. And so if you require that they have to be disclosed up front, they almost take care of themselves, because without being able to hide the fee, you become price uncompetitive on the front end, or you lose a competitive advantage over your rival sellers. And so we introduced this bill as a wide open bill to incorporate into Pennsylvania's pretty strong consumer protection law protections for the transparency of junk fees, that if there were mandatory fees inherent to a transaction, those fees had to be included in the advertised price of an upfront good. We worked through that process in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, and believing that you should pay the price that you see. That was the name of our bill. Consumers should be able to see what a thing costs and pay that cost if they choose to purchase it. And we wanted people to be able to see the actual price, including the fees, not just when they're at the checkout menu at the very end of the process, but upfront. And the analogy that we used a lot is when you go grocery shopping and you're in the bread aisle, you can see all the prices of a loaf of bread. That price does not change when you check out at the cash register at the end of your grocery trip. There's not a bagging fee or a cashier's fee or a cart fee or anything like that tacked on at the end to the price of your loaf of bread. So why should we accept inherently deceptive fees on other goods that we wouldn't accept in more routine transactions like buying a loaf of bread at the grocery store? And you know, in my opinion, the hidden fees restrain the free market and make it harder for consumers to price compare, which is inherently deceptive, and why these fees need to be addressed by both state government and federal government. rules. So here in Pennsylvania, we had bipartisan support for our legislation. The federal actions by some of the folks that we heard about earlier on this convening, as well as the remarks that have been publicly made by President Biden at the State of the Union and other mediums, have really raised the inherent understanding of this issue with consumers. And so when we introduced our legislation in Pennsylvania, we had bipartisan support in a narrowly controlled chamber. We only have a single seat majority in the Pennsylvania House right now, but we had bipartisan support for this idea in this bill, so much so that when it was passed out of the House Consumer Protection Committee, chaired by Representative Rob Matzey, that it was passed unanimously. And we did have to make some changes to the bill to get to that point. We limited the scope to avoid any kind of overlap with federal or state agency jurisdictions. And we really targeted it at the most egregious offenders of junk fees, ticket sales, vacation rentals, food delivery, the things that we really thought were the industries that we really thought were using these fees in the most deceptive way. We targeted the bill that way, and we were able to get unanimous bipartisan support out of the issue with the public and with their representatives. And but we didn't really run into any kind of coordinated opposition. I think that due to the great work of the FTC and outside stakeholder groups like the AELP, there is a high level of understanding of how this is unfair, and we didn't see any coordinated opposition. And I'm proud to report that the bill was passed by the full House last October with a huge bipartisan majority, 171 to 32. And so we were very excited to see that go all the way through and rack up big bipartisan support for our legislation, both in committee and on the House floor. The bill now sits in the Pennsylvania Senate, and Pennsylvania's legislature has divided government. So we are working to try and get our colleagues in the Pennsylvania Senate to pick up this idea and move it forward so that we can get it to Governor Shapiro's desk to become law, so that we can crack down on these deceptive fees in Pennsylvania. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative. That concludes all of our fantastic state speakers. Thank you all so much for joining today and learning more about the work that the administration and states across the country are doing to combat junk fees. Have a great rest of your evening.